Monday, March 30th, 1981. The 40th U.S. President, Ronald Reagan, was leaving a labor convention in Washington, D.C. when he was approached by an assassin. 2 minutes later, Reagan, his press secretary, a Secret Service agent, and a Washington police officer were shot 5 times in the stomach, neck, chest, and head with exploding bullets, called devastators. The shooter was a man who had already attempted to assassinate the former president, Jimmy Carter. His story is somewhat tragic. Growing up with a picture-perfect life, this man lost his sanity and tried to assassinate 2 U.S. presidents. This is the story of John Hinckley, the Reagan assassin. Born May 29, 1955 in Ardmore, Oklahoma, John Hinckley was born into a wealthy and prestigious family. When he was 4, Hinckley and his family moved to Dallas, Texas, where he graduated high school in 1973. He would go on to attend Texas Tech University, where John began to lose interest in his studies and eventually dropped out of college in 1975. This is when his life began to spiral. In 1976, Hinckley packed up everything and abruptly moved to Los Angeles, California to pursue his dream of becoming a songwriter. His dream did not come true. However, while in Los Angeles, John seemed to have had a psychotic break after he watched the 1976 movie Taxi Driver over 15 times, growing an unhealthy obsession with the film. The film follows Travis Bickle, a lonely and depressed taxi driver who becomes increasingly unstable and violent as he navigates the gritty streets of New York City. In the film, there is also a character named Iris, a 12-year-old girl trafficked around New York City, played by the famous actress Jodie Foster.
I want to jeopardize the prosecution.
Without getting specific, was he threatening, amorous? What was he like?
I'm not allowed to say. I believe that it's, that the letters were assumed to have been, love type letters.
When did you first realize the connection between the Hinckley and the letters and the Hinckley?
On his own in Los Angeles, Hinckley was in one of the most expensive cities in America. Losing cash fast and watching movies all day, John constantly called his family begging for money and raving about his so-called girlfriend, Lynn Collins, who was an imaginary person based on the character Iris from Taxi Driver. Coming from a seemingly normal childhood, it was apparent that John was having some sort of mental health crisis. Later that same year, John returned home to his family, who now lived in Evergreen, Colorado, and started working as a busboy. Over the next 2 years, from 1976 to 1978, John would make sporadic and unhinged decisions to move back to California and then re-enroll at Texas Tech University, where he would continue to fumble in and out of school as his mental health continued to decline. In 1979, John bought his first gun, a .38 caliber pistol. It is reported that he would frequently play games like Russian roulette, where he would load a bullet into the chamber, spin the chamber, put the gun to his head, pull the trigger, and hope he didn't kill himself. People started to realize that John was crazy, and in 1980, as John's gun collection continued to grow, he began taking antidepressants and tranquilizers to aid his mental health. However, the medication was clearly not working. John was now stalking Jodie Foster. He saw that she was attending Yale in an issue of People magazine and enrolled in a class at Yale to get close to her. While at Yale, John ended up calling and leaving multiple letters in Foster's mailbox in an attempt to get close to her. He was actually able to speak with her over the phone reportedly twice, where he specifically told her that he was quote-unquote not dangerous. But like the other psychotic acts John attempted, this also did not work out. Now, John had to figure out a new way to get Jodie Foster's attention. His grand plan was to assassinate then-President Jimmy Carter, so that he could become so infamous that Jodie Foster would finally pay him attention. In 1980, with his gun collection containing 3 pistols and 2 rifles, John would follow President Jimmy Carter as he went from state to state on his campaign trail. One day at an airport in Nashville, airport security discovered the guns in John's bag. They confiscated the firearms and fined him only $60. Luckily, John's parents realized that their son was suffering from mental health issues and forced him to see a psychiatrist. They also decided that it was time to cut their son off completely in an attempt to force him to gain some maturity. Unfortunately, it was too late. He went out and bought 2 .22 caliber pistols and a box of lead-tip exploding bullets, called Devastators. The next year, he flew back to Los Angeles, and on March 29, 1981, he took a bus to Washington, D.C., where then-President Ronald Reagan would be attending a labor conference at the Hilton Hotel. The day was finally here, Monday, March 30th, 1981. John woke up and wrote a letter to Jodie Foster detailing his plan to kill the president as a show of his undying love for her. He described his plan as a historical deed. He got in a cab and went to the Hilton Hotel to kill President Ronald Reagan. John Hinckley Jr. emerged from a gathering of TV journalists at 1:30 p.m., letting off 6 rounds from a Rome R614 handgun. President Reagan suffered a gunshot to the left side of his chest, while Press Secretary James Brady was shot in the left temple of his head. Secret Service agent Timothy J. McCarthy was shot in the stomach, and Washington police officer Thomas Delahanty was shot in the neck. The Secret Service team said they knew President Reagan had been shot when he coughed up vivid red blood. The bullet that hit President Reagan in the chest bounced off of the presidential limousine and tore through Reagan's chest, lodging in his lung, causing it to partially collapse before the bullet stopped less than 1 inch from his heart. When Reagan arrived at George Washington University Hospital, he was in critical condition before the hospital was successfully able to stabilize him. President Reagan rested in the hospital before returning to the White House just 12 days after being shot in the chest. Press Secretary James Brady was shot in the left temple of his head, and he was permanently disabled, suffering effects like slurred speech, short-term memory loss, and partial paralysis. Secret Service agent Timothy McCarthy was also shot in the chest, but recovered without serious complications. Washington, D.C. police officer Thomas Delahanty, who was shot in the neck, also recovered seamlessly from his wounds. John Hinckley's trial began about 13 months after the assassination attempt and lasted 7 weeks. Hinckley's lawyers argued that he was insane at the time of the shooting. The jury acquitted Hinckley of 13 assault, murder, and weapons counts, finding him not guilty by reason of insanity. An ABC News poll taken the day after the verdict showed that 83% of those polled thought justice was not done in the Hinckley case, and a tremendous amount of public outcry and backlash followed the trial. The not guilty verdict resulted in 30 U.S. states abruptly changing their insanity defense laws to be more strictly and narrowly defined. And in 1984, President Reagan himself signed into federal law the Insanity Defense Reform Act of 1984, making it more difficult for defendants to obtain not guilty verdicts by reason of insanity. After the trial, Hinckley was committed to a psychiatric hospital and diagnosed with major depressive disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. 4 decades after attempting to murder the President of the United States, John Hinckley is a free man. In 2016, he was released from the hospital and allowed to live with his mother under certain conditions.
Hello, everybody.
Why sit down and do this interview?
I'm trying to show the public that I'm not the person that I was so many years ago.
That people shouldn't be judged on their worst action.
Yes.
And yet, obviously, you did more than most on your worst day.
Foster, which me saying that now, it's ridiculous, but that's what I believed back then. It was in ways like a suicide attempt, just saying this is it, this is the end of my life.
He was diagnosed with 5 severe mental disorders and found to have serious defects in reality, testing, insight, and judgment.